More evidence that the sinister tech monopoly Google is not on the level, not at all what it claims to be. New leaked communications from inside that company show that Google employees discussed suppressing conservative news websites in their search engine right after the 2016 election. In one post from November 9th, 2016, a Google engineer called Scott Beyer called the Daily Caller and Breitbart opinion blogs, quote, and said that Google employees should reduce the visibility of both sites in search results compared to, quote, legitimate news organizations. Other employees said it was the company's job to provide more, quote, context to rebut news outlets they dislike. Robert Epstein is a senior research psychologist at the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology and one of the people who's paid closest attention to the power that Google has. Mr. Epstein, thanks very much for coming on tonight. So Google has said repeatedly that it does not manipulate search results, and yet this is not the first, not even close to the first, piece of evidence we have from within the company showing Google employees discussing ways to manipulate search results. Can we be confident they're not doing it?
Not at all. You know, Google was extremely good at keeping its secrets for almost 20 years, but in the last few months that has changed, and there have been quite a number of leaks. And we have seen a number of internal discussions there, like the one that you just described. And there's simply no question that they have very strong political leanings. 95% of donations there go to Democrats. I myself am not a conservative. I actually, I kind of lean toward Google's political views. But it's frightening to me because of what I study day by day. It's frightening to me that this company, with very strong political leanings, has the power to shift millions of votes, to shift opinions on a massive scale without people knowing that they're doing it and without being accountable to the public.
How can you have a democracy under those circumstances where one privately held company has the power to manipulate people's behavior without people knowing it?
Well, that's what I'm saying, and that's exactly what's happening here. And the situation gets even worse when these huge tech companies, the two largest being Google and Facebook, when they both have the same political leanings. So, you know, in that kind of scenario, we're talking about the ability to shift in the midterm elections. I calculated upwards of 12 million votes with no one having any idea that they're doing this. This is not like fake ads, which you can see.
Right.
This is invisible manipulation. I mean, I literally have to invent new names for the techniques they're using because they've never existed before.
So Google assures us that they're not doing this because they're good people, much better people than we are, for example. How can we know if they're telling the truth, and should we believe them?
Oh, well, they're sure they're good people. That's part of the problem. They have a kind of utopian thinking within the company, not just among the employees, but, you know, their top executives think like utopians. So believe me, they believe that they are doing good for humanity, good for the United States, by imposing their values, their thinking on the rest of us. The problem is, as I say, that they can do it in ways that have never existed before in human history.
So I know that, as you already said, you and I have different political views, probably don't vote for the same people. So you're maybe the person to ask. How can the United States Congress sit back with evidence that democracy, the core idea of democracy, is being challenged by this company and not do anything about it?
Well, the Democrats aren't going to do anything because these companies help them, obviously. The Republicans don't like regulation, so we have a tough problem here in the U.S. Now, the Europeans, on the other hand, you know, they see these companies as American, and so they've been much tougher on them. And I think we're going to see some pretty drastic actions taken against these companies by the EU in the next few years, and that could change their ability to operate worldwide.
I never thought I'd be waiting for France and Germany to come to our rescue, but that's where we are, unfortunately. Mr. Epstein, thank you very much. It was great, as always.
Thanks, Tucker.
Harmeet Dhillon is an attorney who has frequently, at cost to herself, stood up to big tech, and she joins us tonight. Harmeet, thank you very much for coming on tonight. So this, again, as I just said to Mr. Epstein, yet another example of evidence from within this company, and there are other examples like it from Facebook, that show that they're not on the level, that they're lying to us, and that they could undermine the very basis of our democracy. Let me ask you the same question. Why is Congress standing by in the face of this evidence and doing nothing?
Let me add to that. Why is the Department of Justice not opening up antitrust investigations?
Well, exactly.
Why is the Federal Trade Commission not investigating them for their deceptive trade practices and failure to disclose their manipulation of data and theft of data from Americans and others? So today itself, the European Union opened up its fourth in the last 2 years investigation into Google for antitrust issues for manipulating search. Guess what? And so far, they've been fined $7.1 billion in Europe in the last 17 months, but Zippo here in the United States on the same issues. And one of the reasons, Tucker, is that these companies, both of them, are very adept at spreading money around Capitol Hill, including through the use of a former Republican Congresswoman, Susan Molinari. And those are their lobbyists, and they're very effective. That's why you see legislators backing off for the most part. But we are talking about fascistic, control of our data in a way that is perceived as benevolent certainly by liberals, and is not being criticized at all by the right. I think it's a very dangerous situation.
So, but what's the point? I mean, just as a macro question, what's the point of having a government, of sending half your income every year to Washington, if they won't protect you from the most basic and obvious threat to our entire system, which is these companies? Like, why do we have a government if they won't stand up to Google and Facebook?
Well, interestingly, I think we're going to see some action on the part of these companies, against these companies, I should say, in the new Congress, because liberals are concerned about the data theft, much more so than conservatives are. But we're still not going to see anything about this bias in terms of viewpoint. In addition to what you've covered on your segment tonight so far, obviously there's suppression of YouTube videos on an ideological basis. Google also discourages its advertisers from advertising on conservative platforms like Breitbart and others. Google's search engine has labeled the California Republican Party as having Nazi ideology and Republican women as being enablers. It is the most despicable, defamatory work, and it is all protected by the Communications Decency Act, which members of Congress certainly could edit and change, but they don't. And so I'm very disappointed in our government, our conservative government, frankly, in Washington on its failure to act on these issues.
So as you just pointed out very quickly, these companies operate in the way that they do very profitably because they have a special exemption from the Congress, which could revoke that exemption because they're not platforms, they're media companies. Of course, they're editing. Name just, if you would, since we're live now, 3 or 4 members of Congress who, might lead the charge against this.
Well, I guess I don't think any members of Congress currently have identified themselves as being hostile to this. But, Jim Jordan certainly seems to be somebody who's familiar with these issues. Matt Gaetz is another. I think these guys are sensitive to these issues. And I don't think they're beholden to big tech. Maybe they haven't been there long enough to have that sink in yet. But we have had senators. Mike Lee, for example, has looked at the antitrust situation and then backed off. I'd like to see our Senate newly constituted with more votes take a hard look at this, have some hearings, really put them on the spot.
Yeah.
Sundar Pichai is going to be testifying in Congress next week. I have suggested that definitely some hard questions need to be asked, and I know that there's an intention to ask some hard questions
next week. I hope that happens.
So we'll see what happens.
Hope they get moving. Harmeet, Dhillon, you've been brave on this question. We're grateful for it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.